What's going on? In this video, I'm going to be talking about endotoxin and how it affects your testosterone levels. So before we get into the good stuff, first I want the man himself, Peat, explain what endotoxin actually is. So I'm going to play a clip. So first check it out. There's going to be a lot of depth to it, so you kind of understand where I'm going with this. And then after you watch that part, I'm going to simplify it and make it easy to understand for you. So see you in a bit.
If you could outline what is endotoxin, how is it formed and how is it harmful to our health?
I'm not sure that people really know what it's doing in the bacterium, but it's been known since 1892. It was called endotoxin to distinguish it from the older known bacterial toxins that the bacteria, in effect, secrete to poison something in their environment. And supposedly the endotoxin it only comes out when the bacterium is broken apart. But I think actually it leaks a little bit all the time. So I wouldn't say that it's strictly an endotoxin like the textbooks used to say. Okay. That it's a somewhat of a structural protein, but it's a medium to smallish molecule that can leak out in the process of growth and cell division and so on. And its other name is lipopolysaccharide because its structure is a chain of sugar molecules with fatty acids attached. And that gives it kind of a soap-like behavior that is part of why it's toxic so generally. And they are so common in the environment that organisms have their basic defenses against them. One of our basic defenses is the high-density lipoprotein. Okay. And they talk about it in terms of carrying cholesterol, but I think really its historic main function is that it's our first defense against endotoxin once the endotoxin gets into the bloodstream. But normally the intestine is a good barrier against absorbing the endotoxins, and if some of it leaks through the wall of the intestine into the blood vessels and gets carried to the liver enzymes break it down, and so it shouldn't normally reach the bloodstream in significant amounts. Right. But it's a matter of tens of milligrams that can circulate into the bloodstream every day. Mm-hmm.
Do you know, as an aside, do you know if there is a value, a picogram or whatever value associated to a quote acceptable level of?
Yeah, it stimulates defense reactions, and so it's kind of like a toughening up reaction to have a small amount of it.
Okay.
If you're born in a germ-free environment, your first exposure to bacteria is likely to be lethal, but absorbing a little bit of the endotoxin toughens up the system.
Okay, this would be, and again, it's an aside, it's not something I was planning on going through with you, but perhaps this harkens back to the, as you said, the kind of germ, I'll say germ-ridden, but the germ prevalent society maybe of 100 years ago, producing children that had better immune systems and did not have autism or any of the other syndromes maybe associated with the sterile environments of today.
I think the ups and downs when you try to be too sterile and then are exposed inevitably to germs, the sudden shock is probably a lot more stressful.
Right. Okay, well, getting back to endotoxins then, and you mentioned lipopolysaccharide, and some people will have heard of LPS or lipopolysaccharide. How is it harmful to our health if the bacteria, if I'm right in thinking that these bacteria are the main source of this endotoxin, and we are exposed to varying amounts of it daily? How is it harmful to our health?
It triggers a whole series of reactions, and it seems to be a physical chemical process that sort of stirs up a cell to recognize a threat and set off a chain of reactions. And it's the things that it sets into action that really cause the chronic accumulating damage, degenerative damage. It's one of the first things it does on exciting a cell is to cause the cell to take up calcium and to activate the synthesis of nitric oxide.
Right.
And the nitric oxide and the cell excitation that goes with absorbing calcium trigger other reactions, and a small amount of endotoxin can stimulate the intestine to contract more. But if the cells are getting overloaded with it, that and possibly other irritants can cause cells to produce so much nitric oxide that the nitric oxide becomes a major metabolic disruptor and will cause the intestine to lose the ability to contract. And it will poison the respiratory apparatus so that cells can't make energy to fight back. And at that point, with increased nitric oxide and reduced energy and taking up calcium, the cells also take up water.
Right.
And then they become basically non-functioning to a degree.
Yeah, they're under stress, and if the body can deliver enough energy to them quickly, they can excrete the water and the calcium and turn off the nitric oxide and return to normal functioning. But when they swell up, another place that the textbooks give a very simplified, mistaken idea of what is involved in bowel damage from endotoxin. They talk about the leakage between cells, as if the cells lose the glue that holds them in contact with each other, so holes open up between cells. That does happen, but it isn't necessarily the worst way that the endotoxin gets into the cells and passes through the cells. The whole structure of the cell, the cytoplasm, as it takes up water, instead of being fat-like and tending to exclude water and prefer to absorb fats, the introduction of this sugar connected to a fat acts like a soap and makes the cell tend to admit not only more water, but pretty much anything that is in its environment. So the whole substance of the cell becomes kind of spongy and leaky.
Right.
And when this starts affecting the whole organism, that kind of change occurs all through the body. Once the stuff has passed through the lining of the intestine and crosses across capillaries and gets into the bloodstream, then the endotoxin starts doing the same thing to any cell it comes to.
Mm-hmm.
And so it will leak out of capillaries no matter where it is in the bloodstream if the liver hasn't filtered it. So if it happens to reach the brain, it'll cause the brain capillaries to leak whatever is in the bloodstream. And so it can contribute to multiple sclerosis. And the endotoxin leaking into the brain does the same thing. It triggers the release of nitric oxide and a whole chain of chemical reactions that every organ has its particular way of responding to the endotoxin, but there's a generality, no matter what the organ, there are basic defense reactions that will occur not only to endotoxin, but to any radical threat to the survival of the cell, so that X-rays and gamma rays will produce essentially the same kind of change in brain cells or bowel cells that endotoxin does. And so if you're overexposed to X-rays, for example, you'll get constipated the same way that overexposure to endotoxin will cause constipation.
Now that you're back, let's get into the easy stuff. Let me explain simply what endotoxin is. So first of all, we have studies presenting endotoxin reduces testosterone in men and may damage Leydig cells. So you can check out this entire Google document down below. So as we can see here, endotoxin reduces testosterone. Endotoxin can trigger social withdrawal, isolation. If you watch the video about pregnenolone, so pregnenolone is a potent endotoxin antagonist. So pregnenolone is good. So think about endotoxin as in your gut, there is gram-negative and gram-positive bacteria. The gram-negative bacteria have a shell around them. And in that shell, that's the endotoxin. So gram-negative bacteria consume non-digested foods. So if the lower your thyroid function, the higher up the bacteria settle in the intestine. So things like SIBO. So if you have impaired thyroid function, the higher the bacteria are. In a healthy individual, those areas are usually sterile. If I'm pronouncing it right, there's no bacteria there, and that's a sign of good health. But if you have compromised thyroid function, there's gonna be bacteria there. And if you're consuming foods that you're not digesting properly, those bacteria consume the undigested food, and because of the endotoxin, and they shed off endotoxin when they are fed or when they are dying. So when you feed the endotoxins, especially starch, things like, rice or like potatoes, starchy things, even vegetables, green leafy vegetables, these bacteria feed on it and shed off endotoxins. Hence, some experience a Herx reaction when killing off endotoxin. So when you're killing the endotoxin, you're going to have a shed of more endotoxin because you're killing them off. Flu-like symptoms. The state of your thyroid hormones regulate the permeability of your colon as well. So normally in a healthy individual, the endotoxin wouldn't go through the colon. But if you have compromised thyroid function, it does. Endotoxin as well raises serotonin. So if you watched last week's video about serotonin, signs of high endotoxin tie into high serotonin, and those two work together, right? So endotoxin raises serotonin, as 95% of serotonin is produced in the gut. Endotoxin causes leakage of the cell due to the soap-like structure, like texture, which allows other toxins to leak into the area. And how do polyunsaturated fats tie into this? So endotoxin is always present in the intestine, and it's always the first thing to defend against. But many other stressor toxins like radiation, heavy metals, estrogenic substances, too many polyunsaturated fats all tend to loosen up and soapify the cell structure, causing, very similar to endotoxin, causing the cell to take up water and let junk enter from the environment into the cell substance itself and getting into the cell substance and then just as easily going to the other side of the cell into the extracellular material and from there across the capillary cells and into the bloodstream. The thing about polyunsaturated fats, in room temperature, it spontaneously oxidizes. So Ray Peat had an experiment he done himself. He took safflower oil, and you can even do this, placed it in a bottle, connected the tube to another bottle with water, and over a few hours the oil was respiring, sucking in the water because it was consuming the oxygen. Because of the oil was consuming oxygen, oxygen was combining with the unsaturated fats and in the process forming lipid peroxides, which are toxic free radicals. It happens faster in our body because of the higher temperature, and we have catalytic amounts of iron and heavy metals floating around to accelerate the reactions. So if you have a bunch of endotoxins, you have a bunch of polyunsaturated fats, you have high estrogen, which increases the serotonin, you can create a very bad environment within the body. Your organs, like your lungs, have enzymes which deactivate serotonin. But if you're lowering your thyroid function, you're lowering the amount of those enzymes, and the serotonin can take action upon that organ. So it all feeds upon itself. I've seen even theories on when it comes to endotoxins, when your liver can't handle the endotoxin tolerance, what it does is it has to place it into body fat. So another reason why people get fat is because their liver can't handle it, so it needs to store it in a different place, and it stores it in the body fat, and when it has enough energy, it takes care of it. And that's why some people, when they improve their metabolic rate, they lose a lot of weight, even though they're not eating in a caloric deficit. So there's a lot of things that I'm just presenting these statements because there is no 100% when it comes to these things, but they all make sense and they all feed into itself. So when your body is consuming a bunch of starches that your body can't handle, the bacteria consume it, you're shedding off endotoxin, those endotoxins cause more damage, increasing your stress hormones. If your liver can't handle the toxins, it puts it into the body fat. In some cases, if it's in the blood, it can cause things like septic shock. So like I said, I recommend you watch the video on serotonin because it gives you a brighter picture on serotonin. And your question right now is, what's a good way to lower the endotoxin within the body? So one thing is, first of all, is you want to remove the reasons why there is endotoxin within your body. So you're feeding it. And another thing, you don't want to stop giving it sugar. Because a lot of individuals, it feeds on sugar, so we must stop giving it sugar. But the bacteria are smart, candida especially, things like that. Because it senses, okay, there's no sugar, but it senses there's sugar within the blood. So it starts making holes within the system and getting into those places. So you don't want to starve it and annoy it. You want to excrete it using things like a raw carrot, because a raw carrot is naturally within the ground and it has antibacterial and fungal properties for it to survive. If it did not have those things, carrots wouldn't exist because the bacteria would just eat it up. But it developed in a way to withstand those dangers. So naturally it has undigestible fibers. When you consume them, they act like a brush and attach to those endotoxins and flush them out. Raw carrots, I used to, when I started this, it's just raw carrot, how great can it be? When I started using it, within a few days, you notice a huge difference. It's super powerful. I was watching an interview of Ray Peat where he took blood work of a woman and she had super high estrogen, cortisol levels. He gave her a raw carrot for like 2-3 days and the bloods came back to normal because of how powerful it is, because it binds to those things and flushes them out. When you do consume the carrot, peel it lengthwise because you want the fibers intact. You can add things like coconut oil because it protects it for it to go even lower into the intestine, with the vinegar because it's antibacterial, antifungal. And try that and see how you feel after a few days. But most importantly, remove starches from your diet. So like potatoes, things like rice, bread, whatever it is, starches, because those starches are feeding the endotoxin. And you're going to notice that it's working when you start feeling not very good, because you're going to experience a Herx reaction, which is the die-off symptoms from the endotoxin. The things that you're probably going to experience is improved mental function, less anxiety, no more brain fog. You feel lighter. You will notice that less anticipation of anxiety, less bloating, better bowel movements, things like that, better digestion of other foods, less water retention, higher dopamine levels, lower stress, serotonin, and things like that. So hopefully you got some value out of this video. You have a simple understanding of what endotoxin is and how it's damaging your testosterone levels and overall your health, which all ties in together. If you got value out of this video, I would appreciate if you give it a like so it can be good in the algorithm. And yeah, if you have any questions, if you have any other theories or maybe opinions in regards to endotoxin, drop them down below. I'll give it a read and I'll let you know. I'll give you my feedback. And yeah, that being said, God bless and see you later.